Lockbacks, yay! The locking mechanism a step above the liner lock in strength. Lockbacks go way back with folding knives, one of the earliest designs, at least in what I would say are modern folding knives anyway. A very strong locking mechanism, especially in comparison to the liner lock. The main disadvantage to the lockback was always its speed. It's a little bit slower, technically speaking, than a liner, simply because the amount of tension that is on there in order to retain the blade as well. That little guy right there, that little black line you're seeing in the very center of the inside of the knife, that's the torsion bar putting pressure up on the lockback itself so it pivots like a seesaw. Extremely simple design. We just have a pin or a screw that keeps the bar in place. The torsion bar pushes it upward right here, and then we have a little notch inside of the tang of the blade right there, and then there's an L shape at the very end of the bar, which just fits itself in place once it's timed up. The lock bar takes in both of the positive and negative force of the blade, so it prevents it from over-traveling. It acts as a stop pin, essentially, and the locking mechanism itself is what prevents it from closing on you when it's in the locked position. Such a simple design, and yes, a lot stronger than your typical liner lock. But these days, we have a lot of different options popping up. So let's go a little bit further back. This is somewhere around 2005, I want to say, 2004, the original model Voyager from Cold Steel. Here we have a Spyderco Endura, which is modern, by the way. They're still making this the exact same way it is. They don't make these anymore, but again, same deal. Simple bar right there. Torsion bar on the inside. You can see it a little bit more clearly right there, that little black bar. And then it also acts as the stop pin as well as the locking mechanism itself. So the big advantage these always have over the liner locks, they're stronger and ambidextrous. I keep comparing it directly to the liner lock because at the same time, these were kind of the guys competing. Now, this is a much more modern knife. This is an Efingro right here, very cheap knife, but also pretty cool and actually pretty functional for the money. But it's a liner lock. These were all about speed. Now, granted, this one's on ball bearing, so it's not the most fair comparison, but because of the detent in there, as you can see, that little ball right there on the liner itself, that is what retains it in place. So you can build up pressure and flick it out that way. With lockbacks, that's not exactly an option because the torsion bar is what sucks it back in. So these are inherently just a little bit slower, a little bit more stiff, and you usually have to close them with two hands safely in order to transition from the open to the closed position. With liner locks, typically you do not have to do that. In fact, in every single case, you do not have to do that. There's more convenient and more fast, but a little bit more weak. Lockbacks are ambidextrous and they're stronger than the liner locks, but they're a little bit more stiff and they're a little less convenient. Oftentimes you need two hands to close them. You can use one hand to close them. You can rock it forward like that, but there's sometimes where you can't. Sometimes you can accidentally cut yourself. It's interesting to me how we're still using these. We have better locking mechanisms, I think, out there. The Axis lock, this piece of shit is the example I have right here, but this is basically the copy of the Benchmade Axis lock. They lost their patent on it, if I remember correctly. It's also ambidextrous. It's also faster than the lockback, and it's got the fidget factor there as a bonus. There's a video out there I posted a while back showing a Benchmade knife with an Axis lock holding nearly 700 pounds on the handle before it finally broke. 700 pounds, man. That's insane. So faster, just as strong, if not stronger, even more convenient, and also ambidextrous. I mean, you may prefer a locking mechanism to be on the spine if that's just your preference. I mean, that could be a disadvantage for you if for whatever reason you don't want the locking mechanism to be on the sides. But the point I'm trying to make is, although I really like the lockbacks and they're cheap and affordable to produce, they're very simple, they work well, it's difficult for them to compete. You know, they're kind of like grandpa now. For me, they're kind of like, they're struggling to keep up in the modern knife world. We have a lot of other locking mechanisms out there that blow the lockbacks away. Again, back in the day, these were certainly stronger than the liner locks, which were some of your only other options were stuff like this. There were very few locking mechanisms out there. I'm talking early 2000s, even late 90s. These were basically your two options. You go speed or you go with strength. That was basically where it boiled down to. Now, another disadvantage the lockback has in comparison to other locking mechanisms these days is the fact, again, it takes both the positive and negative force. We do not have a separate stop pin there. It's taking the brunt of all of it. So they wear pretty fast too, which means eventually they tend to develop play. In fact, they usually have a little bit of play out of the box. That's just how they are. So let's step over to the Cold Steel Triad lock. This is the one scenario where I can forgive this style locking mechanism in 2023 anyway. Yes, it's still not quite as fast as other locking mechanisms out there. It's still got the slowness issue, although it still flicks out just fine. Just as a technicality, it's technically not as fast as other locks out there, but it's still fast enough, I think. But even though it still has the same issues of possibly cutting yourself if you tried to close it with one hand, it's not quite as convenient as side actuating locking mechanisms or frame locks or liner locks, etc. But with a triad lock with an integral stop pin right there and just its overall design, the difference in it, it's a hell of a lot stronger. And in this case, I can forgive all of the downsides because these locks, the triad locks from Cold Steel anyway, are just so damn strong. Extremely strong. Invincible. You can baton with these things. People have even shown in videos and they still don't develop play. I wouldn't do that with any folding knife, but that being said, it's actually incredible how much force these can take. So with this configuration, a lockback style folder with a stop pin, that's when I can forgive a lockback style knife. So this is kind of like the modern lockback folder for me. It's just a shame other companies can't use it because Cold Steel owns it, as far as I know. Personally, I like lockbacks. They're just classic to me. They're very simple, very cheap, very easy to produce. They get the job done, but they don't last forever. They're a bit stiff. They're a little inconvenient. Again, back in the day against the liner lock, that was your choice. Like, wow, this is a really strong locking mechanism. If you want strength, you got to get a lockback. That's what they were good for. But because we have stronger and faster locking mechanisms these days, again, especially if you directly compare this to a Cold Steel triad lock, it's hard for me to recommend these. What do you think? Can you think of any advantages I missed? Am I an idiot? Did I completely leave out something that the lockback has that other locking mechanisms do not? Please let me know in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on lockbacks?